All right, guys, welcome to Powerline Podcast, episode 110. This is with a good friend of mine, Derek Egroff. I've known Derek for a long time. The reason I wanted Derek on this show is he's been involved with some pretty unique projects in the past. One project in particular was this project up in the mountains of British Columbia in the Kildala Pass. Super cool project. We get into the details of it, but basically avalanche kept tearing structures out. So they built this cool catenary that's strung from mountaintop to mountaintop that they suspended the power lines on. We get into the details. Can't wait to get this one out to you. Let's get rolling. Episode 110, Derek Egroff. Welcome, Powerline Podcast. Actually, pretty stoked to have you on here. We've been trying to do this for a long time, and so I'm glad you reached out and said, "Hey, and let's go with this." So, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Ryan. I'm really glad to be here.
Cool. Okay, so you originally reached out, and you're a trades trainer, BC Hydro, and you're doing a program that's asking you to kind of mock up an interview or a podcast interview yourself, right? So that's where you originally reached out and said, "Hey, can you mind if I interview you for this diploma program?" So explain a little bit about what it is you're doing and why you reached out.
Yes, the utility I'm working with here, BC Hydro, part of the requirements for their trades training instructors is to complete the PIDP, for short, Provincial Instructor Diploma Program. Essentially, it's adult education, understanding how adults learn and relating to that. And one of the courses that we're taking to it is the modern technologies, starting to understand the new nuances that are out there, podcasts, chat GPT, how to incorporate all the new technologies coming online. So one of our assignments was actually to make a podcast, so I couldn't think of a better person to help me with this assignment than a professional in the trade here. So
cool. It's kind of cool to see companies like BC Hydro bringing these sorts of programs on, like giving the ability to teach linemen essentially how to teach and how to help instruct and teach adults. I think it's kind of an important thing. I think that's a step that, whether you're a safety instructor or whether you're just trying to teach anybody within your company something, it's a good program. I had a little micro taste of it there that one day or that one weekend where we did 2 or 3 classes on it, and it was good. It really taught me a lot of things of how to interact with a classroom and how to approach teaching adults. So I'd be curious to chat with you a little bit about what the program entitles as well. But if you want to go ahead and fire me some questions in a mock podcast, let's go.
Very well. Well, let's start on my end of stuff here. Ryan, welcome to my second assignment here for PIDP 3240. As we go here, you're a good friend of mine. We've known each other a bunch of years, got a really good background in podcasting. So I thought maybe I'd ask you a couple questions here on what your take on podcasting is, especially with the putting it in context with adult education and adult learning.
Sure.
So basically, let's start out with a couple questions I thought of here. What do you think is the best use of a podcast, yourself personally, whether it is in the adult education or what?
Sure. It's a great question. I love this question because I look at podcasting like another social media platform. It's just, to me, it's the same as an Instagram account or a TikTok account. It's just a way to garner some attention. Podcasting's different in a way that it gives you the ability to really speak long term. If you look at or long format, say, not necessarily long term, but long format. If you look at something like Instagram or TikTok or any other social platform, you get 60 seconds, a minute and a half to say what you want to say. And usually the audience that's looking through that content is really only there for a few seconds of learning or entertainment. So a podcast gives you the ability to settle in in a long form conversation. It gives you that ability to really like sink into a topic, or, in the way of what you're doing, or you're talking about teaching people something specific. If you're trying to teach them something, there's very few things that can be taught in the matter of a few seconds. And then, when you again think TikTok or Instagram or something like that, you got to hook that person. You got to stop them on that post, and you got to keep them engaged for 30 seconds. Whereas a podcast, people are typically sunk in for a drive, like they're driving to work or they're listening while they're cleaning their house. They're already committed to investing, 30 minutes or an hour into listening to that conversation. So you have their attention for a little bit longer. So back to my original point of, I think it's like any other social platform, but it's unique in that way that it gives you the ability to talk to them in a long format conversation and kind of really, really impose what you're trying to get your point across anyway, is in a longer form.
Interesting. Yeah, I agree here. Now that I've been doing a little research on it, that's the thing. How do you hook them and keep them hooked for an effective amount of time to actually get your point across, for sure? How do you think podcasting can really effectively be used in the adult education scenario?
I think it can really help through, I guess you got to draw upon your experiences. And I think that it can really be effective if the people that are speaking are really speaking upon they're using their experiences and life experiences mixed with what they know about said topic. So it's really like diving into that subject matter expert and being able to share all the information you have as that subject matter expert. Example is when kids reach out to me over the internet, like they reach out over Instagram DMs, and they'll say like something like, how do I get into the industry? Instead of like trying to just DM them one paragraph back, I'll direct them to a podcast that I've interviewed somebody specifically about that topic. And it's a half an hour or an hour of very intimate, thorough knowledge of experience of that person getting into the trade, the do's, the don'ts. Like you can get really technical on it. So I think in adult education, that can really be used effectively, especially in our industry.
The concept of storytelling, I guess, is the real powerful tool in that.
Yeah. When people, and to expand on storytelling, it's all about storytelling. When I get people come on the show and, I'll say, like, sometimes I'll start it off by saying, like, where are you from? And those people that say, I'm from Canada. It's like, okay, it's a dead conversation. It's like, okay, you got to give like little threads in order to pull on those threads. And that's all storytelling. It's like, if someone was asking me where I'm from, I would say, I'm from a small mining and forestry community in central British Columbia, Canada. Like it gives you some threads to connect with that person on, or connect with that audience.
Just putting it in context, giving them, helping with their imagination to picture where you are there.
Exactly.
Very good. Okay, so next one here. What was the biggest surprises you found once you got into the podcasting business that you never really thought about?
How much work it is. It's just like anything else. It's like you'll see all over social media, start a Shopify store and you'll be making millions of dollars, or, just buy your first rental. And it's the same thing with podcasting. Just start a podcast and you'll have this big audience, and it's no work at all. It's like, it's a lot of work. That was one of the biggest things that I didn't realize, how much work it actually was going to be. But the cool thing about it was, it really took consistency to build something. So it's a lot of work, but if you stay consistent with it, you can really make something special out of it. Like anything, just keeping consistent was the main thing.
Really, yeah. What you put into it is what you get out of it, I guess, at the end of the day. And there's no easy wins. Nobody wins the lottery with anything anymore.
Yeah, and it takes time, right? Like that was another thing. It takes time to build relationship with people, to garner a following. People again see so much from social, these kids that blow up overnight just by dancing on TikTok in the beginning or something like that. They get a million followers or more, but it takes time, especially in a niche industry like ours, in the Powerline industry. It just takes time to build something, and yeah, keep consistent at it.
I guess. One last question I got for you here before we go. So, what advice, now that you've gone down the road of podcasting and all that, for all us newbie podcasters are out there, what's the best piece of advice you can give us?
The best piece of advice would be to just start one. It's not easy. It takes a lot of time and effort, but it's just like any other social media platform. It gives you the ability to garner an audience, which is, in a sense, attention, and it gives you the ability to speak to somebody about what you care about. If it's trying to teach people, it's a great platform to teach people. With YouTube and Spotify doing video now, you really got the best of both worlds. You can have a video podcast where you're doing some instruction as long as you're verbally talking about what you're writing on a whiteboard. People listening can hear and people watching it can see. And so best piece of advice is, like, if you really want to start something, just start and know that you're not going to necessarily have a ton of followers off the start, or even if it's a niche audience, you may never have millions of followers, but you can garner an audience of people that like what you do and want to hear what you have to say and want to learn what you have to teach them. So it's a 100% awesome platform for adult education, for sure. I would say just start.
Well, thank you a lot, Ryan, there. Much appreciated. Again, I've got a class of about 14 of us here digging into it, and we're finding all kinds of new nuances and things we never even thought about and how we can relate them to the world. It's actually a pretty fascinating thing when you dig right into it, of how the adult works and how the world's changing, even from 10 years ago. There's so many changes in the last 10 years. It's unbelievable. And I'm kind of firmly a firm believer that the podcast is the one of the new and great ways of hooking an audience and getting your information out to them, for sure.
I'm curious, well, first off, thanks for asking me those questions. It's not a lot of people ask those questions. They ask them in bite-sized chunks, and I don't really get the opportunity to share them out loud. So that's kind of cool. I'll probably just keep this right in my podcast as well, because I think people are interested. And I'm kind of curious, what are you guys learning? Like you and your class, diving into these new kind of platforms and ways to share information, like you talked about Chat GPT and podcasting and these platforms. Like, what are you guys learning? Like, what kind of questions are you guys asking each other, and what kind of stuff are you guys learning about these things?
Just to blend it into the whole thing. Like, it's part of the bigger picture. Honestly, that class we took a few years ago, this is where we come from. How do you help guide the adult mind, get them going down the road? How do you get them to start thinking critically? How do you start to get them thinking creatively? How do you hook your audience? Like, that's one of the biggest things. If you haven't got your audience hooked, so much time could be wasted. So honestly, curiosity is the biggest thing. If a student is curious, he wants to know more. And right from there on, the more he wants to know, the more he takes in. So everybody likes to be in the up and coming and the new. And if you can get their attention, get their curiosity, so much more is retained in the adult mind. So
what are you noticing about the newer generations versus the old, like teaching newer generations versus teaching older generations?
Depends. I know you echo it. So many guys are making contact with you. Is how do I want to be a lineman? I want to be a lineman next year and get up, and it's taking me a year and I'm not making any progress. We come to a world that the the younger generation wants everything today. That 6 months is an unrealistic expectation in their world, that everything takes time. I am noticing that. But on the flip side of it, the younger generation seems to be so receptive to the new information. So yeah, they want everything really quick, but they truly like seeing new podcasts. So versus the 25-year journeyman, again, change is hard for any adult. So the younger generation is accepting change way better than the old one is.
Interesting. Yeah, it's like I talked about this the other day with my last guest, and the younger generation like knows where to go to find the information, and like you just said, is accepting of the new ways, of the new tools available for finding that information. Like even notice some older generations like not even really even still understanding how to use Google, versus the new generations are already like figured out chat and every form of AI, not just chat, but every one of the AIs that exist out there to figure out information, learn, be creative, do the thing they need to do. So it's kind of cool to see that. I would like to see how that fits into something analog like the trades, like in the coming generations, you know?
Yeah. There's I don't know if I've got enough time left in the industry to see how it's going to go, but every day it's changing. But that's not just the trades, that's everything. I just got a new vehicle the other day. Go to look for the owner's manual. It doesn't exist anymore. You have to bring it up on the touch screen on the dash to find the owner's manual now. Like, I guess I can say that the gray whiskers are coming here, because yeah, that was kind of out of the ordinary. I was not comfortable starting to tap around the screen trying to find out how to fix the air conditioning or whatever it was going to be there. But to a younger person, to my kids and stuff, that is not even a blip on the radar there. That's where the owner's manual is. That's where you go find it. So
you've been quite technical your whole career. What if anything are you seeing is coming online as far as like, how has technology's changed, like even the physical devices that are being put on the lines? Have you got any examples of like new devices that are going online that are really like changing the way power is distributed, or, you know, that sort of thing?
Yeah, there's new stuff coming every day. To tell you the truth, this week I was just out with the crews on a stringing project here, and essentially it's a 138 line with one major customer as well as a tap that interconnects with another. And it's been heavily overloaded. For the mine has been increasing in size. So that's part of what they're doing now, is reconductoring this circuit to accommodate the extra loading. But they've got, I can't even remember the name. Essentially, it's a real-time ammeter that's going on the line on prior to the tap versus after the tap. And the information it can relay out in the middle of nowhere, it is picking up a cell signal and doing it. Not only the amperage, but how much the conductor is sagging. It's picking up the wind, so it's got the X, Y, Z axis. That they're monitoring this line that closely. That not only that they're overloaded in the amperage, but they're, when it's 30 degrees out versus when it's 15 degrees out, that it's making new parameters on how far they'll let it go. It's just phenomenal how much information they can get, how quickly.
What kind of decisions are they making off of information like that?
Well, to tell you the truth, it's kind of above my head, but I think that's probably what spurred this reconductoring program. That it's a 16-mile long 138 line, and for whatever reason, about the last 3 or 4 kilometers before the tap to the first customer, it was a smaller conductor. So there was a bottleneck right at that point, that 90% of their line is good for more than it'll ever see. But this 10% bottleneck, they've been monitoring the last few years to see whether it would suffice for upcoming loads. And they kind of made the decision that, no, we're going to have to bite the bullet and do a reconductoring on it. So make sure our customers have the power they need.
That's so interesting. I was just looking in the book, The American Lineman, at what I think was like the first hot stick or the first live line tool. They called it the Mount Whitney tap in California. It was a tap that I believe it was like tap feeding a gold mine. And they didn't, and this tap also had a tap off of it feeding like this little town or the village or whatever that supported the mine. And if they needed to shut the power off to the town, they didn't want to shut the power off to the gold mine. They wanted to keep that thing functioning for good reason. So they came up with this device. It was just a wooden cob pin in an insulator that they tied into the jumper. And it was just hard drawn copper jumper with a little hook on the end of it. And that was the tap that fed the town. So the lineman would just climb the pole, grab that wooden cob pin, disconnect the jumper, and disconnect the line to the town. I just think, if you look at that was the beginning of, shutting a tap off or keeping a copper or gold mine running. And you look at where we've come to now, it's kind of crazy. Now we're monitoring all these things and like the wind and the amperage on a second by second basis. And it's kind of cool.
The information and the new ideas that are out there are absolutely phenomenal on what all these new little creations. Again, everybody's getting drones. What can a drone do now? Putting on marker balls, putting on dampeners. There's all kinds of new technologies coming in. There's no way we can even keep track of how many new ideas are being implemented out there.
So they're testing drones putting marker balls on? How does that work?
I've seen little clips here on YouTube and heard of it a little bit, but I don't know enough of it to really say one way or the other.
Let's rewind a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about your history, like where you come from and your history in the trade. So share where you're from and how do you get into the line trade, I guess.
First start as a real young child was in Western Canada in Alberta when we were about, my father was a lineman as well. By the time he started the family, he was working for utilities. Late 70s, British Columbia had a big boom of construction going on, 500 kV, 230 kV. So he decided to move the family out to southwestern British Columbia there, southeastern. And from the time I was about 7, I was kind of exposed there. That basically moved right to the heart of the projects going on, new dams going in, new 500 kV lines going up. So it was exposed to the life of a lineman there from a very early age. I still remember, 3-4 years old, riding along with him in his pickup truck where he was a foreman on the crew on the utility side and going out with him for the day and stuff. So I guess it was kind of ingrained in me from an early age. Graduated 1988, I think. I really liked aviation, thought about being a pilot, but the eyes weren't good enough to do that. Again, what's every 17, 18-year-old kid wants to be a fighter pilot, but that wasn't in the cards. Had a thought about maybe aeronautical engineering, stuff like that, but also had this idea, knew what the trades were about, especially the line trade, and got on with utility as a laborer there at the generating station there in, fall of 88. Graduated in June. September, I started with utility and got a lot of good opportunities. Next year, I got offered either electrician apprenticeship or lineman apprenticeship at that time, and decided, I wanted to be a lineman. That was the cool stuff. So off I went for an apprenticeship with utility there in 89 through about 93.
What was it like? So your father was like building 500 kVs, or just big transmission projects? Is that essentially what he was?
Yeah, same. He had apprenticed years before with utility, but that was 60s and so forth, where I was big build, was a bunch of years construction. Decided it was time to settle down a little bit, get married, start a family. Spent a few years with the transmission crew at the utility, but I guess the excitement, the call of the British Columbia was just going full bore with big 500 kV construction projects. So got in on those for a whole bunch of years and got it back into he probably spent about the next 20 years in construction. Things would boom and bust. Same thing. It's life of a construction lineman for 4 years. Basically only saw him twice a year as well because he had to be on the East Coast of the US working there. But
what are some big things that you noticed, like if you remember going out with him as a kid or even just getting into it yourself on construction then versus construction now? Is there what are some big things that you've noticed?
You know what? I honestly, well, again, you're pretty small at that point. Remember what you said, but you know what? Construction's always been construction. It's been a big group of guys get along together. They're friends at work. They're friends after work. It's one big family with the construction trade. I will say that I don't think a whole lot's changed on that end of stuff. Guys who want to get up in the morning, go out, get the job done, and just enjoy working. I will say that. The guys in the construction trade are probably some of the most happy-go-lucky guys I've ever seen compared to maybe somebody who's been working in the same plant for 25 years and so forth there. That I really do enjoy that. It's always a fresh take.
What do you think that is that makes you happier? The happier is the right word, but makes you a happier person working outside versus inside. I've noticed that as well. Like those people that, I grew up in a small forestry mining town. Like I said, I have uncles that worked in one sawmill for 45 years, one place. Not that they weren't happy, but just totally different.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that weather. I guess I'm back up. So I spent 15 years with the utility to start with, my first apprentice, and spent about 11, 12 years with the utility after I finished and got my red seal. Decided it was time for a change for myself. Went to the private sector in the contractor industry for 18. And now, like I said, I've come back to the utility environment into a trades training role with the utility here to finish out the years I have left. But I think really it's just seeing new things, experiencing new people. I think it's not that those people get into they're not happy. It's just the variety is there. Again, you can love cornflakes, but when you eat cornflakes every day for 25 years, you just kind of long for eating Raisin Bran one day. So I think so much of the construction industry is get up in the morning and you just don't know what your cereal's going to be that day. And that's part of the challenge, and what they honestly, truly makes a guy enjoy getting up and finding a new experience every day.
It's funny you mentioned that. I worked with a guy. Did you ever meet an old timer named, I think it was Bill Nicholson? He
no, never met
lineman from the Vanderhoof area, and I worked with him for a period of time just before he retired. And every day I noticed after a week and a half, every day he had the exact same lunch. It was a peanut butter and jam sandwich, an apple, and a banana every day. He's like, I've eaten this every day for the last 50 years for lunch. He's like, I never have to think about what I'm making for lunch. I'm like, that's dedication. I don't know if I could do that 50 years in a row.
It's the personality. And that's what there's so many free spirits in the construction industry versus it's the guys who don't want to eat the same peanut butter and jelly every day. That's who they find. And so I think that's why so many of these construction crews get along, because they're got that same unique kind of personality.
That is interesting. I'd rather work with a low maintenance type person than a very high maintenance type person that's got to have special food made for them every day for lunch. Hey, I want to talk about a couple of special projects that you've been on. It's been a long time since I've had Peter Catchpool on the show. So I think got a lot of more new followers that probably haven't gone that far back in the archives to listen to that episode. I want to talk a little bit about Kildala and Camano. I know that was kind of a special project. So maybe just explain what that project was, and then we'll get into a couple more details on it, because I think it was kind of a cool one.
You're talking the Catenary, right? Because we also did a big insulator replacement project for
Yeah, let's talk about both
customers.
to be honest, but talk about the catenary. So just like maybe set the scene for where on earth this is and a little bit about why this project.
So this was, yeah, you know what? This is a once in a career project that I was really proud to be part of. I wasn't there start to finish, but I did get a good chunk of it, and it was something. I don't know honestly if there's anything else comparable out there that I've heard of anywhere else in North America, possibly in Europe. But it's up in northwestern British Columbia. An aluminum manufacturing plant has their own generation, approximately 50 miles from the aluminum smelter. So they have two circuits of 287 kV that come up a valley, up over top of a glacier, probably some of the most rugged country you could ever possibly see, and down into another valley that makes its way along to the smelter. So this was all built in the early 50s. And I think the history, I'm still not there, but they built all this wonderful double circuit 287, energized it, and 8 months later, the first avalanche came down the mountain and wiped out 8 towers. So they kind of scratch their head deciding what they're going to do. And back then, they actually essentially strung huge steel cables across the mountain and suspended the conductors on these steel cables so that future avalanches would come out underneath. So I believe it was 2007. They had another avalanche farther up the mountain, took out more towers. I think it was one tower that time, but just made more devastation. So they basically said that, this was the solution they came up with 60 years ago. Maybe it's time to try it again. So that's what it ended up being. It was a multi-year project to essentially install. There was 28 steel cables that get banded together, but essentially strung from mountaintop to mountaintop. Elevated platforms, helipads built on these steel cables, and then the conductor itself was raised up about 500 feet, suspended from these steel cables. So any other future avalanches will blow right underneath and leave it there. So now I believe there's about a little over a 2-mile stretch where there are no structures, that this massive cable, it's just about the size of a beer can, that's suspended off these two catenary structures for I think it's over 10,000 feet before it hits another structure on the ground.
It's so wild. I will, if anybody's watching this on YouTube, I'll throw some photos and maybe a little bit of video in here just to set the scene for this, but it's pretty cool. I had the ability to fly over top of it and land on the helipad, which is kind of unique in itself as well. Have a helipad 600 feet off the earth, just suspended on top of these cables. How big are these cables, and what was a bit of like that process of building it like what were some of the challenges of building it?
For the actual catenary itself, like I said, we had 2 projects going on at the same time on these same circuits. They were also, again, the circuits were 60 plus years old, and the customer there had concern all their suspension insulators were coming of age. So the actual construction of building the catenary itself was going on over top of the mountain while I was on a live line project of changing these insulators on the other side. So I was impressed what they're doing. I've seen all the pictures, but I wasn't actually part of the crew that was building it. But the following year, I was part of the crew that went in to remove the one existing tower on the ground below it and raise the conductors up the 600 feet to attach them to the new catenary project. So,
do you remember the size of the conductor? Because it was special made conductor, right? For that
the
one?
conductor is EMU conductor, a giant ACSR conductor, 3.5 million MCM, I believe.
It's like the size of a Coke can or something, right?
Essentially, pretty much, yeah. It's almost the size. I think it was 2.5 inches in diameter or something like that point. It was huge wire.
Wow.
All it was originally pressed there with ACSR, but it came to the world. It was all in plosive sleeves, two-part plosive sleeves. You have to blow the steel core, which was probably a 1-inch diameter steel core, and then put another implo over top to seal the, I can't remember, it was probably 3 or 4 layers of aluminum stranding.
Amazing.
So that with a second implo.
It's even the structures themselves, and like, again, if you're listening to this, go on Google later at home and just type in the Kildala Pass or Camano. Alcan is another one you could type in. Try to look at old photos. I know I've Googled some old photos of this line because there is some archives on the internet. It's really neat to see the then and now, like to see how they actually built this line was cool. I don't know if you've seen any of them, but the workers camped like right up in the Alpine, essentially built these camps up on the right of way. And there was a helicopter that looked like they actually called it the egg beater. I can't remember what type of helicopter this is. Maybe you know, but I read that when that helicopter came into Canada, it stopped for fuel at YVR, which is the Vancouver International Airport. It stopped at YVR for fuel, and at that time, it was apparently the largest helicopter they had ever seen that had ever landed at YVR. And I think it was the first time that helicopters were actually used for construction purposes in Canada as well. So kind of a unique.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure if you need any photos, again, I've got hundreds of photos. Kitimatmuseum.ca. You can find not only the power line, but the generating station Commandos. The generating station that they built is absolutely phenomenal of what they did in the late 40s, early 50s. So again, helicopters were brand new. It was a brand new invention. It was the Chat GPT of 1949 that they came onto, that building this. As well, you find, I agree, the structures, how they built it. Yes, they had helicopters, but they weren't big enough for the weights and forces that they had up there. And the other logistical issues, like it's 2 circuits of 287. They couldn't find enough steel because the Korean War was going on. So their alternative, that 1 circuit was built out of essentially aluminum tubes. Background in the ship industry, somebody came out with a novel idea, and the picture a sawhorse built out of about 4-foot diameter aluminum tubes and 130 feet tall. That is what they built it in sections. And you find some of the, how they built these things with little gins and stuff in sections, and how the bridge rolled up the legs and sat on top was absolutely phenomenal. The rigging that went on there is second to none when you see the pictures of how it was done.
It's really cool because like you just said, there's these photos of these guys just shirtless, up on these aluminum structures, like A-frames, like you said, sawhorse A-frame style, standing on the top with these pole gins, raising the bridge up, like in the Alpine. They're all black and white photos. Like, it's super cool to see just how people made this happen back then. I don't know, super interesting to me.
Worked all day, and like I said, yeah, there was, I think, 11 camps along the line. The camp 11 was basically right on top of, right at the glacier level, that people lived up there year round. I don't know, they weren't doing much for construction by then, but I think they had guys monitoring imagine living in a tent camp with 40 feet of snow falling around you.
Insane.
They did that during a couple of years of construction.
We actually landed, when I was flying around up there, we landed at Camp 11. It just pictures sheer glacier rock, like smooth glacial rock that was flat enough that you could build kind of a camp on top of. There was no buildings or structures there anymore, but there was remains of buildings and structures, still wood up there from it, as well as like helicopters. They used a couple of different types. They used that egg beater style, and then they used these little choppers that had almost like a lattice tail on them.
The old Bell 47, yeah. I think the ones you see in MASH, same helicopters you saw in MASH there.
That's the one. And if those broke down, they just left them up there to rot. So you can actually go up there, and we found like a tail section of one just sitting on the ground, all bent and twisted now and rusted away. But it's kind of cool. They just
Even for what's up there, that line was so rugged that they brought pullers and so forth in for a single pull. They brought them up the mountain in pieces, put them together, made the pull, and said it's not worth taking it out of here, built a little shed around it in case they ever need them again one day. And there's still pullers sitting in little tin sheds up on the side of the mountain for, I don't think they'd ever work anymore. And right on the very top of Camp 11, there's still one building left. There's a
that's right.
T70 cat. There's a cat shack up there that we actually used that cat during this construction project. That it just lives on top of the mountain. Its roads are long since washed out, that it's never coming out of there. But
I've seen a few of the photos and videos of building that more recent Catenary, and seeing that Chinook, I believe it was, flying that snowcat in, or snowcat or bulldozer or whatever it was, flying that thing in pieces so that you guys could put it together and clear the side of the mountain for the anchor points.
We did fly a snowcat in and a smaller excavator and essentially like a D8 cat that was up there and is never leaving. We used it while it was there, and I don't know if it's been started again since.
That's wild. Yeah, that's pretty cool. You talk about replacing the insulators. Do you have a number on how many insulators were replaced on that line?
Oh, I don't know. Like say, it was essentially the better part of 50 miles. So I couldn't, probably pushing 80 to 100,000 pieces of glass were replaced up there. All the dead end structures were triple string. The real heavy ones were 6-string dead ends. So yeah, there was thousands upon thousands of insulators changed up there. So many of them was dead end to dead end to dead end. So
that's so crazy. All right, another project of yours I kind of wanted to highlight just because I know a bit of the background on it. I think it was pretty cool. Was developing the first HETS system or Class D system. I believe it was the first in time longline was used for rope access or access to working environment outside of the rescue industry. I believe like a rope under a helicopter, this was the first time it was used in construction or out in the work environment. Is that correct? And if so, like what was developing that like?
Pretty close. I won't say it has never been used for before, but I've never heard of another episode of that. It kind of, again, tied my interest in aviation back in together. So for the last 20 years in the Powerline industry, I had been using helicopters, lots of helicopter progress. But the one utility came out with their concerns on their 500 kV system was starting to age, and they believed the life of the spacer dampeners was wearing out. So they've got thousands of miles. Well, I'm going to say, yeah, a few thousand miles of 500 kV, and the amount of spacers that had to be changed in essentially inaccessible areas. And of course, with today's constraints of getting outages on major grids is get so much more that the customer came out there and asked for proposals on, how can we get these spacers changed with minimal outages. So up till then, essentially there was helicopter platform work had been going on. This customer wasn't overly, what's the right way to put it? They had some concerns about the risks involved with platform operations. I don't think they had totally eliminated it, but they wanted to know what other options were out there. So essentially came back to knowing how Parks Canada and so forth had been essentially longlining people. And in the United States, they've been doing this for quite a while. There is different regulations between the FAA and Transport Canada. And essentially what you could do in the United States wasn't really allowed up in Canada. So how we could come up with some kind of system that conformed to Transport Canada's requirements. It was quite a good process. It took a couple of years, right from the type of helicopter that was permitted to do this work to the harness that would be allowed for the worker to wear. It's all very tightly specified by Transport Canada on what you can and can't do. So it was probably a year and a half process to essentially get a pilot project that Transport Canada blessed and see how it came there, to give it a trial that the rules for life or limb rescue or police work or fire suppression are different than day-to-day work in Canada, and it's way more stringent to use it as a work method as it is for a life or limb rescue. So I came up with a program that satisfied Transport Canada's requirements in order to use it as a work method.
It's interesting too, because like when you talk about using this method for search and rescue or something like that, it's usually just like a once in and once out, or a couple times in and out. If you got a couple people stranded on a cliffside or something like that, and you're trying to rescue them, versus performing hundreds of rotations a day of line workers, getting them on and off, on and off the power line. Not just on and off the power line, but in most cases, we're going on and off an energized power line, an energized 500 kV power line. So there's that component and that aspect of it too. So I don't know, super cool project, I think.
Yeah, it was a really good project. I was proud of. Part of it was under 2012 through 2016. So it was about 5 years that we were part of that project. And in that time, I think we changed 70,000 spacers or so during those 5 years.
It's phenomenal. It's neat to see it's neat to see how it's become a work method that's adopted more use. It's interesting to look at, because like helicopters are very safe in their way, but then also when things happen, they happen very quickly and usually very devastating if something does happen. So it's just neat to see how they're being used as a tool, and how that's going to change with like the introduction of drones per se.
That is honestly part of that whole process, the year plus on getting an approved system. You don't know how many times I scratch my head is like, why is there a rule for what it is? But really, when you come to understand of why Transport Canada is as stringent as it is, it's because to really understand the risks of using helicopters, that, yeah, it's not likely that something's going to happen, but if it were to happen, it's not a bent fender, it's not something wrong, it's usually multiple fatalities. So that is the level of risk that's got to be understood. And honestly, in the utility environment, I'm not so sure most linemen truly understand the risks that are involved with using helicopters. That I don't know what the best way to put it is, that I have no fear of using a helicopter today, but if I could walk across a field and climb a structure versus long lining into that structure day in, day out, there's no way, because it's not likely it's going to happen, but it's the same thing of walking in front of a loaded gun. If nobody's finger is on that trigger, you're not going to get shot. But why would you ever walk in front of the gun if you didn't have to, when you could walk behind it? Like, truthfully, I think that's the biggest part that I'm in here now is trying to educate the utility workforce on exactly the tools here. It's not just a big machine making a bunch of wind and a bunch of noise. The horsepower that is being controlled, like there's thousands of horsepower in these birds going around, and 1,000 different parts all balancing things out perfectly. And all it takes is one missed step or one bearing to let go in that 4,000 horsepower machine for it to essentially explode right in front of you. And I'm not sure that most guys truly understand that.
Yeah. If anything, it's good just to start asking the question more. Like, do I actually need to use this? I know it's fun. And
information. The best thing that you can equip a worker with is an understanding and information. Don't take anything as gospel. Understand it. That's, I keep circling back. That's part of this adult education. The level of comprehension of your adult students? Are they just doing this because they've been told to do it and they're following the rules, or do they understand the process of why they're doing it? Again, nobody will walk in front of a loaded gun if they realize it's loaded, pointed at them. So education is the biggest part of a safe work environment.
How are you mentioned adult education. I like to go back to that. That's cool. Because how are you getting people to, I don't know if that's the right word. How are you getting people to critically think?
It's a slow process. Honestly, I'm really challenging the students, the apprentices that I'm meeting now. Just because I say something, don't take it as gospel. I've now learned 25 plus years in the trade. I had always just accepted you do this because that instructor 20 years ago or that lineman told me to do it that way and what it is. But did you understand what you were doing and why you're doing it? So one of the first things I tell the students, the new apprentices, and we're coming in for a class, like, I want you to truly understand. If you don't understand, there's not a bad question out there. If you don't think I'm saying right, or you're just taking it as gospel and don't understand, challenge me on it. I want you to have the understanding behind what's going on, and because you're going to have to make a decision one day, and the only way you're going to make that decision is to understand what's going on, not because Rule 427 says I got to do this.
That's one thing that I found when I was instructing for a couple of years there at the Lazy Q, was especially with the pre-apprentices, it's something I noticed that was very, very prevalent right along, was their lack of ability to think critically. It was so strange because it was almost like across the board. And I don't know if it was just a couple of 2, 3, 4 classes I taught. So it's only that 150 people. But I just noticed it across the board between all of them. Really was just that, especially the younger they were, just the lack of ability to think critically through a problem and problem solve. And that was one thing that we're constantly trying to teach them. They would ask you that question, just like you said, we'd tell them, okay, there's no dumb questions, like, if you can't figure this out, ask us the question. But then they would just come and ask all of the questions. And it's like, okay, you need to try to solve this problem yourself first, and if there's some details in there, I don't know, what's your approach to that? Because I'm sure you see it too, is like, okay, this guy said just to ask all the questions. So it's like, hey, Derek, what about this? Derek, what about that? Derek, what about that? It's like, okay, you have to try to solve it yourself first.
Try to solve them, or not ask for the answer, ask for information. Honestly, that's the biggest thing right now, that Siri, how do I solve this? That they want the answer, and it's not the answer they need, it's the information they need to process it themselves. That, again, Google's here to stay, ChatGPT's here to stay. Everybody's going that, well, they won't have to do anything anymore. They're worried about every time you got an assignment, you're just going to go to ChatGPT and they're going to spit it out and here's your assignment. Yeah, you know what? That's the way the world's going, but we've got to learn how to use these tools and not just turn into robots and drones. We got to use these tools for information, not for answers, and come up with our own conclusions from it.
That's a really good point, because it's a very analog type of work. So you mix the information with the actual doing of the task, the action as well. And I don't think you're going to figure it out unless you do the thing yourself, whatever that thing is. It's like, I could tell you exactly how to change a cutout fuse, but until you actually go through the process yourself, I don't think you're going to know how to do it. You're going to know on paper, kind of, maybe, but then when it comes to actually doing it, you're not going to realize the special trick you do, or whatever the example is. There's the information mixed with the action and the doing. And it seemed like they just wanted to cut the action out. They didn't want to do anything. They just wanted to get the information, like you said, and the answer, and go about their day.
That's where it is. Yeah. Okay. Here's how you do it. Putting a grounding scheme together. We got to need a grounding plan. Well, the book tells me to ground this way. But you know what? The real world is not there. Yes, this is the ideal scenario, but this is not what you've been given in the field. So it's being able to adapt, do your best to comply to the rules by no means, but what happens when the rules don't apply for your specific situation? That's where we've got to get them to start thinking of, okay, the rule wants me to do this because of that. I can't do it. How can I modify and still meet the requirements that have to be going? Because that's what I see all the time. Everybody grounds because they told me I got to put the ground A to here, ground B to there, ground C to there, and I'm good to go. Okay, that's great. You've just got your grounding plan there. Do you know why you did what you did? No, I'm doing it because that's what they told me to do. That's where I'd like to get this down to, is I'm doing this because this is what the net result is. This is what's happening when I apply these grounds here.
How important do you think it is that they be able to explain the why? So use grounding for example, because grounding's probably the number one controversial topic in the, on the face of line work. You constantly get this, do it this way because that's the way it's done. And it's like, why? And they're like, just do it. This is the way it is. And they'll get really like flustered and fight you on it, almost like, no, it's this first, it's this ground on, or you have to use this truck ground, or whatever the have tos are. And you just kind of go, why? Explain it. How important is that, being able to explain it?
I think that's the biggest part of it. Coming from the contractor side, that you work for all these different customers, you walk onto customer A's property, boom doesn't come out of the rest until the chassis is grounded. You go on to the next customer's property, we never ground a chassis unless we're inside a substation. So there's a direct contradiction there, and you leave the worker going, well, what the, right? So you really got to understand why you're grounding that chassis. Not doing it because Rule 6 tells me that all chassis must be grounded, but understand it because there's going to be scenarios where you may want to ground the chassis. There may be scenarios that you don't want to ground the chassis, that you see it imposing a significant hazard to your work site. So you need to understand what's going on so you can make the best decisions for you and the crew you're working with. And if there isn't a contradiction to the rules, well, then it's time to take it up the chain and explain why you have a concern with it. And you know what? I've seen rules changed because people have thought of things that I never thought of that before. Yeah, this rule addressed one hazard, but I never thought about the other hazard that it now added to the system that we never even comprehended. And rules do change.
And you need to be able to show your way through that. So,
yeah.
So that's great advice for somebody that's complaining about something like a rule that they don't like. It's like, okay, well, why don't you like that rule? So now get to work on explaining why you think it's a bad rule, or why you think it's not really the right thing to do, and get some actual facts down on paper and try to take that up the chain. I like that process.
Yeah, there's so much that is it's no good just because I feel that it's a bad rule, but you need some justification. You need the logic behind you to understand why it's happening and why it is maybe not detrimental, but maybe it's not in the best interests of you in this particular scenario.
From the trades training perspective, now that you're in it in this modern time, what are some things that you're doing now that you could, make privy to us, some things different that you're doing, or some things that you're seeing from the trades training perspective in the trade?
It's a tough question. Well, right now we're just reassessing that everything needs refreshing, updating. Part of what we're doing, going through the apprenticeship program, that there's courses that are 10 to 12 years old. Okay, is it time to relook at them? And maybe we're talking about stuff that we no longer do. And is there maybe better focus on something else there now? Part of what we're doing right now is, how often were you taught about rules of thumb for strengths of rope and so forth? You know, are we still in the right spot there to be giving them square the eighths times whatever that factor is? Or everybody's got a phone in their hand now. If you know what rope you do, Google the manufacturer of that rope. He will tell you exactly what it's good for or what its breaking strength is. And you can do the calculations from there. Like all this, that's what we're finding now. A lot of these old rules of thumb were needed when nobody had a cell phone. But now that everybody's got a cell phone, in how much information's at their fingertips, maybe we got to start thinking about certain things a little bit differently now.
What are some other new ways that you're using technology to help with education?
Or
are you guys just kind of in the like figuring it out stages still? Like, it's first off, it's like, it's pretty cool that you're even recognizing things like podcasts or chat or different texts and actually accepting that this might be a way forward and a way to like solve some problems. Like that's good problem solving in itself, because I haven't seen that in a lot of this industry. This industry's typically never been really that industry that's gone, hey, let's take the new tech and use it.
Is it? You know what? The world is changing faster than it ever has before. And change is inevitable. You can fight change all you want, but it's coming. You're not going to hold back the tide. So honestly, we've got to start looking at new approaches and looking at what's working today, because there's a lot of stuff. I know there's still some talk about, people are still talking about splicing manila rope. Yeah, you know what? It is a factor, but manila rope disappeared, I don't know how long ago. How many new varieties of rope are out there? Tech 12, Amp Steel, all this great stuff that really there is very little value in knowing anything about manila rope anymore. Sure, 60 years ago there was, but you've got to adapt with the changes. New technology, new products come out. That's what we're dealing with now. So let's learn about those.
This is my iPhone 3GS. So I just found this and found a cable to charge it up. So I charged it up, and I remember getting this phone because this was 2010. So it was 2009, 2010. I first started talking about iPhones to the company, because if you remember back in this time, if you're around, like this was the BlackBerry days, right? So especially in corporate America, everybody had a BlackBerry because it had the buttons. It was very recognizable. I could do my emails, text messages, and phone calls. It very limited for applications, different applications and things like that. And I saw this, I was young at the time, and I saw this iPhone and I was like, dang, that's dope. So this was my very first iPhone, and I was like, whoa, like the things you can do with this thing. So I started to introduce it to the bosses at the company, and I'm like, we need to get on these. Like, I can take photos of the job site, I can video, I can email this right from there. And it's like, it's better. And I think I was the reason that iPhones existed in the company shortly after that, and BlackBerries were on their way out. But it was a fight. It was a fight to prove why it was better. And I remember having to like actually build a case for this device versus, the other device that existed. And I don't know, just scale that up. You got to be welcoming to technology. It's there to make your life better. It can make your life better in a lot of ways.
Just as you were saying that, I got a flashback there. I remember pulling into your shop. I don't know, we were going north somewhere one time, and we came into your shop that one morning, and I had the brand new iPhone 4 and at Siri.
Yeah.
I still remember how your eyes bulged out the first time I asked Siri something, they gave you an answer.
I remember that too. Super cool. I was like, hey, I need an iPhone 4 now. And there goes the thing of getting a new iPhone every year since. Oh, that's cool. Is there anything else that you specifically wanted to talk about? Those are kind of the things that I wanted to chat with you about. Is there anything that you specifically wanted to talk about?
No, nothing specifically. Honestly, I think we've hit a lot of it on the head here. If I can leave one point, it's just, if we want to get to be to a better place. We've got to have a better understanding of what's going on. And I've really come that way the last 5 to 10 years. It's not that everything that I was ever taught was wrong, but now it's now that I'm looking at it through a different lens, it's so much clearer. Everything goes together if you grounding and bonding. Honestly, one of the biggest things I'm going here is we've always incorporated the two together and they get mixed up. One of the big things I'm doing now is trying to, let's separate the two. They are two distinct things that work together.
Interesting.
And that what grounding is and what bonding is. Because every course I've ever had is equal potential bonding and grounding. It's one topic, but if you can think of it in two different topics and understand the principles behind it, it just makes everything that much clearer.
That's super interesting. Is there good references for this? Like if a person wants to self-study on this, do you have a reference outside of the specific utility that you work for and their material? Like, do you have a place that you can go online for info about this sort of thing, or a book?
There's all kinds of good sources out there. And the one thing I am found is it's been a common theme so far that they keep incorporating the two.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm even finding when they're starting to separate the two, the different customers I have, they start down that process, and then about halfway through the process, they revert back. It's hard to change completely or fully adapt to anything. The more references you get, there's not one book that I would say be gospel anywhere. In fact, the more different sources of information, I think the clearer picture you can get. Take a little bit from every source you got. And what's giving me red flags now is it's the stuff that, well, if there's actually a contradiction, if this source says you should always ground a chassis of a truck and the other one says we never ground a chassis, what's going on? Why is that contradiction there? Start asking those questions. And now that you understand why they say yes and why they say no, you'll see, I'd say, honestly, there's scenarios when both are correct. So which one should I be doing today? Which risk am I mitigating more? Is it a 1 in 10,000 chance that this can happen and that's why we do it this way, versus a 1 in a million chance that something could happen and that's why we should be doing it the other way? Start making those kind of decisions.
Cool. One more question that just kind of popped into my head that I wouldn't mind you answering is, now that you're dealing with apprentices, I get a lot of pre-apprentices, apprentices, and people just wanting to get into the trade. What's your advice for somebody getting into the industry today? Like the how, the why, like what should they be asking themselves? What should they be doing? Those sorts of things.
You know what? The enthusiasm I see out there is great. Again, the patience is a big thing. I've got a couple young fellows right now that are really digging hard going for an apprenticeship there. Like, you can just see the enthusiasm. It's awesome. But again, keep going to that thing that I want it now. Okay, well, nothing happens today and it takes work. Do what you can. You've said in the background. Can you take a first aid course? Can you get a commercial driver's license? Can you do stuff that's you can bring relevance to the profession you want to get into? Those are all excellent things there. It's okay to have to be a laborer for a year or two, that you don't feel like you're doing anything. You're not getting to climb the pole, but you are getting exposed to the industry. You're learning how to use your hands. You're learning how to problem solve. So many of these guys, I want to get a set of belt and hooks so I can climb the pole, practice climbing. So many of these young guys coming in, I'm seeing they don't know how to put chains on the truck.
Yeah.
You know what? There's an awesome skill that will do you so much good down the road. That's great. You can get up and down that pole, but you know what? We drag trucks and we drive trucks everywhere now, so we climb as little as possible. The transmission crews out here will have to chain up tri-drive axles and stuff 10 times before they ever have to worry about putting their hooks on now. Start getting good at those hands-on topics there. Like, that is what is gold.
Mm-hmm. I like that. That's true. And that, speaking from a lineman's perspective, if we don't have to be the ones getting down underneath a dripping wet slushy wet vehicle to put chains on, the better. And so if like you can, if you can make yourself useful as a trades trainee or a pre-apprentice or apprentice and actually get down there and put those things on and know how to do it, you're going to be the one that gets to come with us on the crew. And then, you just expanded your opportunity to learn even more once you get to the job site, because now you're there. That was your ticket there, essentially. It's like, hey.
Absolutely. And knowing what you're doing. Like, I've had apprentices that could put chains on trucks, but they're also, that same apprentice was on a slope putting the riggers down to jack it up, on a slope to put the chains on. Like, it's, oh my God, there's a chance at a fatality there. It was. If you can problem solve, understand what you're doing. Yeah, the truck's got to be chained up, but if I put the riggers down, is there a chance it's going to start sliding on me? Like, to have that comprehension of the world around you, that kind of situational awareness, that's what you get by doing those hands-on experiences.
Facts. Cool. Well, thanks, Derek, for coming on the show. I enjoyed the conversation.
I did as well. Thank you, sir. Much appreciated. Hope to talk to you again soon.
All right, guys. I hope, as always, you got some value out of the episode. Super cool project. I've had the opportunity to be up in those mountains. I've landed on that helipad. It is so cool. Such a unique area. Hope you learned something. All right. One ask from you guys is that you follow, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. As I've mentioned before, not everybody that follows or listens to these shows is actually following or subscribed. So if I could ask you to do that, and one more thing, if you could leave a review, that'd be stinking awesome. Appreciate you guys. See you in the next one. Peace.